This week on the Nittany Dispatch, we discuss Penn State's defensive communication issues and preview the Kent State game this Saturday. This week on the Nittany Dispatch. So, Audrey and I, earlier today, recorded a podcast that you are listening to or watching on YouTube before Penn State's Wednesday evening practice, which proved to be quite the decision. As James Franklin said Wednesday night, that safety KJ Winston is out with what he called a long-term injury. We know that James generally only says those things when it's going to be a long-term injury. So with that piece of information, we will, be discussing that part of all of this before we get into the full podcast that we recorded earlier today. So you will still have a full episode. This is what we will call the, preamble to the actual episode. But Audrey, I am curious your takes on KJ Winston being out with a long-term injury.
One, I knew that we were going to get got when we recorded earlier this afternoon.
Yeah, we did this to ourselves.
It was a risk that we were willing to take for our loyal listeners of the Nittany Dispatch. But yeah, this is a significant blow. I mean, there's no way around it, right? I mean, I think you're losing one of the best players on your team for an undisclosed amount of time, but you're also losing one of the best safeties in college football, right? And that's the part where you say, okay, this can really change things, not in a good way for Penn State. Now, if you want to try and find a silver lining in this one, it is that they have depth at safety, right? Like all offseason, we heard James Franklin say that they believe they had 3 starters with Jaylen Reed, KJ Winston, and Zakee Wheatley. Well, now you have 2 for sure. And John, I think, right, like we saw Jaylen Reed and his versatility shine against West Virginia. Can Penn State still get that versatility from this secondary without Winston?
So this is, I don't even know if it's a hot take, but I think the loss of KJ Winston, obviously it's awful for him and for the team and everything. We know KJ a little bit, we had every interaction
great
we've had
interview,
with him
yeah.
has been great. But I think the loss from a schematic standpoint is less about what KJ does and what it may force them to do with Jaylen Reed, right? I think one of the Jaylen Reed through 2 games has been the defense's best player. I think KJ is up there, right? Before, against West Virginia, KJ was deserving of the accolades he was getting, even if I thought Jaylen had a better game. I think KJ played at the level he was expected to and surpassed it as well. But this may force Penn State to move Jaylen Reed back to safety rather than the line position, which when they go base essentially is a third linebacker. When they go nickel is the 5th defensive back. I thought it was interesting tonight that James Franklin, of course, said that it doesn't really change what they do in the nickel. It just might change what they can do when they're in base, because Reed was essentially like that linebacker. And I do think they should, and it sounds like they will, try to exhaust every option to keeping Reed at the front of the defense or near the front of the defense rather than moving him back to safety. Dejon Lane is going to get a bunch of reps on Saturday. James mentioned Antoine Belgrave-Shorter, who's a true freshman, is getting work at safety. I think they need to do everything in their power to put Jaylen Reed in that Lion position and keep him there. Not because Kent Miller can't play the position or anything like that, because he is ostensibly the backup, but because that is how you optimize this defense. It is at its best when Jaylen Reed is that 5th defensive back rather than as a safety. Not to be clear, I think he's very good at safety, but I think that 11th spot on the defense is a problem, right? Whether it's a third linebacker or a different 5th defensive back, I just think it's not going to be as good. And I think they're correct in doing this. It seems like they're going to exhaust everything they can to keep it the way it currently is set up and replace Winston rather than backfilling Reed in Winston's spot and then having someone take Reed's spot.
Yeah, no doubt about it. I think you brought up some really good points there, because that is that hybrid spot, right? Like the versatility piece of Jaylen Reed. I mean, you're just not going to find that with somebody else, especially at this point in the year. And he's been operating in that role since Tom Allen got here, right? He told us that back in the spring. So this gets really interesting. You and I spent most of this episode talking about, oh, it's Kent State, not too much stuff will be interesting. Well, now there's one big thing to watch. And I think you're right. They're going to exhaust every option, try and figure it out. And I do want to mention, John, because I know that it was something that someone brought up to me on Twitter right away after the injury. Someone said, and they did not mean, I don't think, for this to be a joke, but they said, "Where's King Mac?" And I said, "Well, he's at Alabama, right? Like this
Tuscaloosa.
is." Yes, he's nowhere near here. And this is one of those things that, the transfer portal by and large has been tremendously good to Penn State, right? Like, I'm not going to sit here and say, oh, the portal's a problem, blah, blah, because it's not. It's been really, really good to Penn State. But this is one of those moments where you say, yeah, you still have depth at safety, but boy, it sure would be nice if you had King Mac right now.
And honestly, with the way they play, they really don't have depth at safety, right? They have depth at
Right.
safety in the
In
sense that,
numbers, but not,
yeah,
yeah.
and if you're starting two safeties,
Hmm.
yes, but you don't really want to play Jaylen Reed back there. Again, this is not me saying he can't do it. I think he would excel in that role. It's just him being in the spot he's at and has been for the first 2 weeks really unlocks the defense. Um, it's, I mean, we'll see. Like, I think Illinois is going to be the first time we really see how this impacts the defense, but this could fundamentally change Penn State's trajectory, right? Like
Hmm.
KJ Winston is that good. Playing like this is that important to how Tom Allen wants to play. There's no way around it. This is a like you said, it's a massive loss. Like I think if we were talking from a combination of talent production standpoint, I think he's the best player on the team, right? Like, and anytime you lose the best player on the team, like that's gonna do some
There's a
damage.
problem.
Now that being said, if they can find someone to play safety at a competent level, like I don't even think that they have to be like an all conference level player at safety. I think as
Mhm.
long as they can find someone to play as a starting level safety, and Jaylen Reed can stick in that spot, I think they're going to be okay. But does this change your outlook on the team this season?
It does, in that we are suddenly talking about Dejan Lane, a true freshman,
Yes,
as, hey, this is somebody who's going to have to get up to speed in a hurry. And yes, they've been really high on him this preseason, but again, that's a quick transition. This is also where, kind of keep in mind, I was pulling up the roster because I wanted to make sure we didn't miss somebody. This is also where earlier this offseason, Dakari Nelson moved from safety to linebacker, right? He's listed at 6'3", 222 pounds. So he's not going to be going back. But you look at, okay, well, how do they get to this position? That's something else to kind of keep in mind. I just think you're asking a heck of a lot to put on the plate of a true freshman. Anthony Poindexter has his work cut out for him. Tyrese Mills is somebody that we've seen bounce back and forth between safety and linebacker. The redshirt senior really just has not made that significant impact yet. So that's kind
he
of one.
was
Go ahead.
he was so when Jaylen Reed at local media day in early August, Reed said, I think I might have said this on here before. Reed said that Reed was the starting line, then it was Cam Miller, and then it was Tyrese Mills. And I think they're all like Mills is closer to Reed than Miller as a type of player, but
Mhm.
I can't imagine Penn State wants to be in a position where they're frankly starting Tyrese Mills at this point. Uh, I would guess that, like I said, they're going to exhaust all options, and if they can't, then they're just going to be in regular nickel a bunch with Cam Miller in the slot in that nickel
Mhm.
position. Um, I would cannot stress enough that I think it would be a really idea for them to go to base full time on early downs. Like going to base 4-3 would be really they do not have the
Mhm.
linebacker play to
Linebackers.
do this. Like
Yep.
they don't have the athleticism at linebacker. They frankly I've said this before, like they should be getting everything they can out of Kobe King and Tony Rojas. I think those two are high level starting linebackers with the upside to be more, but like that's what they've got as far as like guys I would want on the field against Ohio State, against USC, especially who's those two places, especially are going to run RPO a lot, and they're going to put the stress points is going to be linebacker, and they're going to
Yep.
get eaten up in the middle of the field if it's anyone but those two. Operating in space. They have other linebackers who are good at coming downhill, sure tacklers, but I do not want anyone but those guys operating in space and in coverage. If I'm a Penn State fan, and maybe Dakari Nelson ends up getting ready. I don't know, like maybe Tamir Robinson, who was back at practice we saw
Mhm.
tonight.
I was gonna say
Uh,
there is a positive
that's
on the injury
that
front.
that
Yes.
that is that's the key, right? If you believe that Tamir Robinson is a starter, then okay, then you can go to base a little more because those guys have athleticism and Tony Rojas can operate freely a little bit there. But I would be in general. This won't surprise anyone. I don't think that listens to this pod frequently. I would be in 4-2-5 all the time anyway.
Mhm.
I do like
And
four two
never
five with
kicking
the third
field goals.
safety. Correct. And but like I would be trying to avoid base as much as I can unless it's like obvious 4th and 1,
Mhm.
4th and 2 goal line situations where you want to be in it. But yeah, I think there's no way around it. I don't know that it's going to be devastating for Penn State season, but this is the first real pivot point, and I don't know that we're going to learn enough. And we can talk about the potential of Cam Miller playing at
Mhm.
that line more and what it does to the team. But I think we're going to find out Saturday how much they really want to do that and how much. I think they're going to troubleshoot Dejan Lane there. Same with Antoine Belgrave Shorter. Same with anyone they can find that they think can do the role and keep Jaylen Reed where he's at right now.
Yeah, I was gonna say the AJ Belgrave shorter piece was interesting. I'm pulling it up right now. I remember when he committed, talking to some folks down in Jacksonville area about him and kind of his upside. He's listed at, let's see, 6 feet, 6 feet 195. Again, I mean, I think the interesting part of this when we talk about like getting your best 11 on the field is that number 11, right? However you get there, number 11 is probably going to be pretty young. And that's just kind of what it's shaken out to be, whether it's Belgrave shorter, whether you end up, with somebody
Tamir
else trying to,
Robinson,
right, whether it's Tamir
Dejan
filling it.
Lane.
Yeah, like I just, to me, how they get there is going to be really interesting to see. But yeah, I'm with you. The timing, and again, we don't have a timeline. James Franklin would not go into the specifics of the injury, but long term means
Long term
long
means
term.
long term, right?
Mhm,
Like James Franklin is not in the business of talking about how long players are out unless it's a meaningful amount of time.
mhm.
Um, is that all season? Is that all regular season? We don't know.
Is
Um,
that maybe it's a longer season, you have a shot to play in December? We don't know.
right. All stuff worth considering. But yeah, I think this is uh, obviously a pretty dour preamble, but I think we've covered a lot of
Yeah.
ground to begin this thing. And we will stop with some of the bummer part of this podcast. We will discuss it a lot more, of course, after the Kent State game and what we see. And I think that's obviously going
Mhm.
to be what Audrey and I are watching over the next couple weeks. Next week at practice, see who's operating where. But until then, we will head to the rest of your regularly scheduled programming. Let's take a brief break from the podcast to discuss our friends over at Roback. I have been wearing Roback, and so has Audrey, long before they were a sponsor of this podcast. And you can too. If you go to roback.com and your first order, you sign up, you get code TND20. That's the Nittany Dispatch 20, TND20, for 20% off your first order. And Audrey, I got to tell you, I highly recommend it. I'm wearing it now, as people who are watching on YouTube can see the logo. You are as well. This is
We
some
match.
of my favorite gear.
Yeah, no, me too. We're in officially what I declare Roback hoodie season, John. As
Yes.
soon as the calendar flips to September, I go in my closet, pull out my hoodies. Perfect, lightweight, athleisure apparel. I wore it in the press box last week. Probably will wear it in the press box again this week. Huge fan of Roback and what they provide. Whether you are working out at home, walking around the neighborhood, maybe listening to the Nittany Dispatch while you walk, or out in public, you will look good and feel good doing it with our friends from Roback.
Yeah, that's you and I both are wearing performance hoodies right now. They are fantastic. I wear the performance polos when I golf. Frankly, they feel good whether it's warm or cold. I feel like I'm always the right temperature. They're fantastic. I couldn't recommend it anymore. And don't forget to use code TND20 for 20% off your first order over at roback.com. Now back to the show. Hello and welcome to the Nittany Dispatch. I am John Sauber, Penn State beat writer at the Center Daily Times. She is Audrey Snyder doing the same at The Athletic. And this is a foregone conclusion of how this
What
is
is
going to
that,
go this
John?
Saturday.
You don't think
Listen, I
Saturday's going to be competitive? What?
listen. I know the jinx that I nearly put into the world with the Bowling Green game after
Mhm.
doing it for the Illinois game all those years ago. But this, like, if this isn't at least a 40 point, differential by the end, I would be surprised. This is a terrible, terrible, terrible Kent State team and a very good Penn State team. And by the way, Kent State lost by 71 to Tennessee on Saturday. So I am unconcerned if I am a Penn State fan.
Well, John, you mentioned Saturday, Kent State, Tennessee. Did you watch the game or no? Because you were out of town.
No, I was tracking the game
Mhm.
because I was curious, but I was at the Wake Forest Ole Miss game on Saturday in Winston-Salem.
So you were watching more competitive contests, is what you were saying.
Not really. It was the Wake Forest Ole Miss game was also not all that competitive. Did enjoy my time in Winston-Salem. Did enjoy the stadium there. Had great seats too. So that was a lot of fun. But yeah, we were monitoring, me and my friends that were there. We knew what the spread was of Tennessee Kent State, or we knew it was massive at least, and we were monitoring the score, and it got out of hand real quick.
Yeah, I went to Winston-Salem last summer for a journalism awards thing, and it's a very fun place. Like there were a lot of breweries there. I don't remember any of their names, but I just remember like it was a good scene. And it was very fun little area. Yeah, I was watching the game because I was home in State College, hanging out doing manual labor around the house, in the yard,
Very
digging
different bye weeks.
yeah, digging post holes in my yard, which I now have a newfound appreciation for that new skill. Uh, but so I'm watching the first half of this game, and I'm like, okay, I can't watch the second half. Like this is horrible. The fact that, and this is where it ties back to Penn State, the fact that Kent State was offered a running clock in the second half, but declined. I think this tells Penn State fans all they need to know about this weekend. The fact that their coach, Kenny Burns, said after the game, like, he let it up to the captains. The captains said absolutely not. And then he reiterated, like, that's not our program. That's not the culture of our program. So if you're thinking like Saturday, like it's going to be a blowout, but if you're thinking it's going to be, in and out, running clock second half, yeah, I don't think Kent State is going to soften their stance on that one.
Yeah, that is. I did not know that. It's a little disappointing to hear for our sakes on
Yes.
Saturday. Before we get too much further, though, don't forget to rate, review, and subscribe to the podcast on Apple Podcasts. Those 5-star ratings and reviews really help us out. If you're watching on YouTube, hit the thumbs up button down below. Hit the subscribe button. That really helps us as well. But yeah, this I would expect that offer to be made again this Saturday. Like I think that is going to be the case probably in the third quarter. Like I think it's going to be a pretty brutal game. And I know some people will, say, well, look at Bowling Green. That was supposed to be a blowout too. This, Penn State needs to be on their P's and Q's with this. Like you can't take them lightly. I am here to tell you that Penn State, one, won't do that, to be clear. Two, could do that and would still win by 30. This is probably the worst FBS team in college football in Kent State.
Yeah.
Kind of not a lot going for the program at this moment. This team is probably going to go 0-12 if I had to guess. There are some other bad teams in the MAC, so they could sneak a win out somewhere, but this is one of the worst teams in college football, and Penn State should steamroll them on Saturday.
Can we call them the White Sox of college football? Is that the...
Honestly, I think that I'm trying to figure out who that's more offensive for, and so I think it's probably accurate because of that. But if I were Kent State, I would be mad about that because there's some managerial and some, I should say, ownership dysfunction there at Kent State in Chicago, excuse me, that isn't necessarily there at Kent State. I actually think Kenny Burns has a chance to be a good head coach and do some good things there. But the Chicago White Sox, as long as they're owned by Jerry Reinsdorf, are done for.
So you mentioned Kenny Burns, and I was watching his news conference after, like, a couple days after the Tennessee game because I wanted to see, like, what do you say after a loss like that, right? And obviously he spent a lot of time with PJ Fleck at Minnesota, and it shows because at the end of his press conference, he had, I forget what their other tagline is, but Kent Grit is one of them. And it's like, the press conference ends, they just got it handed to him, and he's like, oh, I Kent Grit. And I'm like, what did he say? And then I went back and replayed it. So definitely, and like the point that he kept hammering home in his news conference is that they're a young team. And then on top of that, like they had legitimate concerns, and this will carry over to Beaver Stadium. They had legitimate concerns about their center and like, how does a young center operate on the road at Neyland Stadium? It'll be the same thing in Beaver Stadium. So they had a lot of concerns about that. Now, John, because John is listeners know I'm not a gambler, but John's made it his effort this season to try and get me to better understand the sports gambling landscape. So I'm trying here. And so I come with numbers now.
Yes.
Penn State opened this week as a 49-point favorite, right? So again, if you're saying like, oh, what about Bowling Green? Yeah, no, 49-point favorite. To put this in some historical context, since things like this have been tracked, like historically since 1995, this is the largest spread of a Penn State game. Now, you might say, well, what about the James Franklin era? There have been some real duds along the way. I'm looking at UMass, Delaware, and Idaho. Those spreads, Penn State was favored by 42 in each of those three games. Now, as you might recall, or if you're like me, you might have forgotten everything about those three games because they were so boring. Penn State beat Idaho 79-7 in 2019. They beat Delaware 63-7 in 2023, and they beat UMass 63-0 in 2023 as well. John, do you remember anything about those three games?
I remember, I believe it was a Devin Ford 80-yard touchdown against Idaho, something like that,
Oh,
somewhere
that might have
around
been,
there.
yeah, because I
I
remember
think that was
nothing.
actually my first game in the press box, if I remember correctly. That was a while ago, though.
Actually,
Because
I
this was, I believe that was the Devin Ford long touchdown. But no, one, you should remember anything. It is much healthier to not remember anything from those games because they were over from the start, as it will likely be on Saturday. You mentioned that number at 49. It's down to 48.5 in some sports books now. I imagine that's going to go back the other way because the juice is on Penn State's side of that 48.5 right now. But yeah, there's not a lot of reason to believe this is going to be competitive, but I think there is stuff to learn about Penn State still, most notably about the depth when it comes to personnel, but also there's this issue that is looming with the communication, right?
Mhm.
And it will only, strangely enough, be a major issue, I believe, at home games for Penn State because part of the problem is the crowd noise and how
Yeah.
loud it gets. So teammates can't hear Kobe King when he gets the call and tries to relay it to the defensive lineman in the secondary. That shouldn't be a problem on the road because road opponents, the crowd will likely be quiet when the offense has the ball or relatively quiet. So I think this is only an issue at Beaver Stadium, but it was a problem that several players and coaches have cited over the last week
Yeah,
plus.
it was a Bowling Green issue, but it was not a West Virginia issue, which I think speaks to your
Right.
point of like home games. And obviously, when you think about it from that context, right? Like you're playing at home in Beaver Stadium, your crowd's going to be amped because their offense is on the field, right? So you want to have that home environment. Well, the challenge with that, and this goes back to Penn State all off season, as most teams do, and throughout the NFL, it's the case too. You talk about the green dot, which player wears the communication? It's Kobe King for Penn State. They worked all off season on this and best ways to communicate. But then that first half against Bowling Green happens, and James Franklin said after the game, and he reiterated it during the bye week media session, that there were communication issues in that first half. And I asked him about it again this week on Monday because I thought when he said that last week that it was a really interesting point, in part because they've spent so much time trying to hash this out all offseason, as all teams are because it's new this year. And the thing that he said is, you've got challenges because your defensive backs are so far away. If they're on that opposing sideline, which they are, he's like, they're 53 yards away and Kobe's getting the call. And how do you do that? Well, during this idle week, I was scrolling X as one does, and I came across a clip from Danton Lynn, the USC defensive coordinator, and they have a safety wearing the helmet communication instead of a middle linebacker. And Danton Lynn's reasoning was that from all of his time in the NFL, which I believe was 9 seasons, he was used to the helmet communication. And he said that, because of the distance with the defensive backs, they believe it's easier to get the call into the safety, have the safety then set the defensive backs, and then signal from the sideline to the middle linebacker who can then set the front. So I don't think James Franklin will be that forthcoming with what changes, if anything. But I do think it's something to monitor because, again, if you're a Penn State fan, you're in the midst of 4 home games. This is not a scintillating one by any stretch, but you're still going to come. You're going to tailgate. You're going to be loud. This is going to be a good test for that communication to see what changed and if this maybe is an issue at home games in the future.
Well, I'll be interested to see. I think the solution is the inverse of essentially what USC does, right? Have King wear the green dot for Penn State still, have him get the front 7 set, or the front six, I guess,
Mhm.
and signal in to the defensive backs, right? Like the three safeties and the two corners, uh, just to make it easier, just to make sure that Kobe King's probably going to be close to the line of scrimmage most of the time, so you're not going to have to worry about him being far from lineman or the other linebacker. But to kind of eliminate that, I think they should signal into the defensive backs so they're good to go, and then get the call through the headset for Kobe King, because it's probably too late to switch it to how USC does it and to try and get Jaylen Reed, Zakee Wheatley, or KJ Winston, whoever, like accustomed to listening for the play call and then getting it out to the other guys. I think they're better off, especially when you consider, let's say you have it be a safety, they're still pretty far from the opposite side corner, right? Like unless
Mhm.
you're in something like cover three and you have a safety in the middle of the field, like you're still having to signal to
That
one corner
distance.
that is pretty
Mhm.
far away. And so I think the easy solution is to do that, signal into the corners and the safeties, and have the front seven, front six be Kobe King's responsibility at this point.
Yeah, and James Franklin made the other point too, which I thought was interesting, which makes sense. He said, yeah, and if you're trying, if you're relaying it into Kobe, he's turning around and telling the defensive backs, "Hey, here's what we're doing." Well, meanwhile, you look at the other side of the ball and they're making adjustments, right? So when you start to think about tempo and you start to think about, Big Ten play in more important games, this is something that they have to get figured out. And maybe they have it figured out because the second half, everything was certainly buttoned up against Bowling Green. But yeah, for me, that's kind of the one thing to look at. And John, you mentioned KJ Winston. Where do we go with this?
Yeah, so we're recording before James's practice availability Wednesday night when
Hmm.
he said he potentially could have an update on KJ Winston. If it warrants it, we will hop back in, add some discussion, or
Context, if we
have a
need.
separate video here on and separate emergency pod if it's necessary. But right now, his status is up in the air. He, was clearly not fully himself in that Bowling Green game. Came off the field and didn't go back in. I believe that was in the second quarter that
Hmm.
happened. Uh, I mean, I have to imagine
He
if
was
it
on
is
the
anything at
sideline
all.
though in the second half.
Yes,
He's on the
yes.
sideline, but did not go back in. Hmm.
I have to imagine if it's anything that can be nagging throughout the year, or is like a soft tissue injury or something like that, I can't imagine they would play him on Saturday. Like, it would make absolutely no sense to play him on Saturday, especially when you're trying to get Dejon Lane snaps anyways. Like,
Hmm.
this is a good chance to do that. Frankly, like, this is one of the things I wrote about in my preview. Like, there's not a reason to play a lot of these guys. Like, the elite players that they have on offense, like, I would not be playing Drew Allar very long. I wouldn't be playing Singleton or Allen very long. I wouldn't be playing Warren very long. Like, you might want to have the offensive line out there a little bit longer, just because that is, you're not trying to get Bo Prabula or whoever else is at quarterback hurt back there. But there is, like, the goal Saturday should be to get to Sunday fully healthy. And if
Hmm.
anybody has any nagging injury, treat it as a second bye week. You know what I mean?
Yep.
Like, following the last week, like, just give yourself a chance to be fully healthy for an Illinois team that might be going to Beaver Stadium ranked, right? They're
And
they're significant underdogs at Nebraska Friday night on the road, but
mhm,
like, that Illinois team, I think, is better than many of us projected them to be, and like,
for sure.
you just got to be ready to go when homecoming happens.
Yeah, and I again, we'll if we need to update this, like John said, we will on KJ Winston. But as we record this earlier in the day, Wednesday, there's nothing that we can update you on there.
Right.
But James Franklin did open the door when he was asked about it Monday when he last met with us. So yeah, we'll see there. But I'm with you, John. Like think too in terms of fans. Think about rep counts, right? And the fact that James Franklin's mentioned it so many times. This could be a potentially a 17 game season, which I mean, there's a lot of lining up there to hit 17 in terms of a title game and not getting a bye and that type of thing.
Only 2 teams do it, and it's very possible that even the 2 teams that get to the college football playoff don't play 17, because one of them might not have won the or made it to the conference
Right.
title.
And
So,
so, but the point is, it's going to be a longer season
yes.
potentially, right? And you want it to be a longer season because that means you're winning. But the challenge with that is that you're trying to eliminate as much wear and tear as you can. And you might say, yeah, these guys should all be fresh. They just had a weekend off, all that. And they should be. But Big Ten play is coming. You want guys rested. But John, to your point about you want to kind of get in, get out. I agree with you on that. You want to get these guys as fresh as possible, as healthy as possible. Can you imagine the discourse we will be having here on the Nittany Dispatch if that happens, they get in, they pull the starters early, they're rolling, and then they come out flat against Illinois, right?
Oh,
Then
to
we have
me,
a different conversation.
yeah, but to me, there's so much
Mhm.
distance. I also don't buy the like, unless you have a new operation from center to quarterback. Like I
Right.
wouldn't play like in the NFL. I wouldn't play starters in the preseason either. I don't buy into a lot of that, anyways. Of needing those level of reps. If they come out flat against Illinois, it's probably because they were going to come out flat against Illinois either way. I don't think this would have necessarily too much of an impact. But like someone like Caden Saunders, this could be huge for to have 2 straight weeks of non-game action to allow him to get fully
Mhm.
healthy. Khalil Dinkins, like I'm sure they want to get him reps to get him more up to speed after he played a little bit against Bowling Green, but do that, get him up to speed, get him ready to go, and get him out. Like this is the depth at tight end is already diminishing quickly, right? We know Luke Reynolds is a green light
Mhm.
now because Andrew Rappoyer is out with a long-term injury that he suffered, in a practice, right? Like you don't want to put things, you don't want to put really important players in harm's way. And there are a lot of guys that are really important to this team, and if you start pulling away from depth, they kind of already are struggling from that standpoint. I think it's dangerous. And honestly, let's say you told me that Penn State was going to have a slow start against Illinois in the first quarter, but you're going to get out fully healthy against Kent State. I'd probably make that trade if I were a Penn State fan, knowing that Penn State is, better enough than Illinois that they can get away with it and win anyways. I just think you are risking the season with putting guys out for too long on Saturday, whereas we know teams can probably lose 2 games this year and still be fine. Not
Yeah,
that I think that they should try to lose a game or anything like that, to be
yeah,
clear.
John's the
If you
fix
told me the
is in.
trade-off To be clear, if you told me the trade-off was a loss to Illinois, then keep them out there for the entire Kent State game. But like, I don't believe that's the case.
Yeah, and since you and I have mentioned, we've teased this Illinois game quite a bit. We do know this week. Well, we have it narrowed down. The start time is
Yeah.
officially either 7 p.m. next Saturday or 7:30 p.m. next Saturday, because that 30-minute window is really going to make or break John and I our day. But it's all for TV, of course.
Yes.
I did have to laugh because when they released that graphic, actually, you were with me when I was looking at it because it was shortly after James Franklin's press conference on Monday. Again, new Big Ten, new things, and fans picked up on this too. They put the timing on the graphic from the Big Ten. They also put the Pacific times on there
Yes.
now. And I had people reaching out. They're like, "No, it says 4 or 4:30. Like you said 7 or 7:30." And I was like, "Oh, no, no, guys. Like I almost did the same thing, but it's Pacific now. This is we're a coast to
Yes.
coast conference these days, so our times need to be represented accordingly." Um, because of this, John, because it is a less than stellar opponent, as we've outlined, because this is the second of 4 consecutive home games, what kind of crowd are you thinking potentially shows up to Beaver Stadium on Saturday for a 3:30 p.m. kick?
I think shows up will be good. I think it'll
Mhm.
be over that 100,000 number. I think makes it to the second half. Maybe not. I think those of us in the press box would be wishing that we could be them when we see them departing the stadium at
Mhm.
halftime. But
Without our
yeah,
running clock, yeah.
yeah. I'm really hoping that Kent State changes their tune on that one. I would really appreciate it if they did.
Listen,
Uh,
if I talk to Kent State, which is still up in the air, you might be seeing a story on this on the Athletic between now and Friday. Maybe you won't. We'll see. We've got some things out there. I will ask John. I will go straight to the source and ask them about the running clock thoughts on Saturday if this lines up.
Yeah, and I think, like I said, I fully expect it to. Like I fully expect that offer to be made and everything. But yeah, I think the crowd will be good. I think it won't be a concern. And frankly, I think it's the last crowd that will be a question for. Right, the
Mhm.
following week is homecoming. The week after that is UCLA. And while UCLA is maybe not as good as anyone had hoped. I mean, I say that as
Yeah.
someone who thought they were going to win like 6 games this year. I don't even know if that's on the table. Indiana, of course, better, I think, than people thought as well after blowing out UCLA on the road. That's where that thought's coming from. But I think that UCLA game is the last, like, even maybe on the schedule of, how good the crowd will be. But this is really it, right? Because then Penn State's in it. This is the start of conference play after that. You have to take every opponent very seriously. And I know We talk about the 1-0 thing all the time. James Franklin is going to have his guys ready to go every Saturday because they're so solely focused on that one game. I am here to tell you that the foot can come off the gas sometimes. These guys are human, right? No matter how much you profess it, no matter how much it is your ethos as a program, the foot can come off the gas at times. And they just need to make sure that's not the case moving forward. But like I said, they don't have to make sure that's the case Saturday because I don't think it matters.
I had a thought, John, because we mentioned, safety and trying to get people healthy. What if, and again, this is not allowed, I'm just joking. What if Penn State went out and got like 2 to 3 players from State High and put them on the defense? Would they, along with the regular starters, could they still beat Kent State with 2 to 3 high schoolers on this defense?
This feels mean to Kent State. Just
Just
posing this
hypothetical.
question in general. I don't think because I think you can. Wow.
Because
Are they
depending what positions there, right?
are
You could
hold on?
corners.
Are they D1 level like kids with scholarship offers
No,
somewhere?
no, these are like
Oh,
average
then
high
no,
school players.
no, because then you're playing 8 on 11. That
Mhm.
Penn State would have no chance. Like they're getting torched.
Maybe that's what
Uh,
they should actually present, not a running half and not a running clock in the second
just
half,
take
but hey,
one
we'll give
player
you a
off the
couple
field
players.
until it's
Yeah.
competitive.
I
Every
mean,
drive,
listen,
Penn State loses a player.
I say this because this is one of those so overly matched games. And I know you and I, we both love college football. It's our job. But these are the kinds of games that also drive me absolutely insane as a fan of the
Yes.
sport, right? Like people love to get college is so better, much better than the NFL. Find me an NFL game this weekend that's going to be as bad as the one that we're going to cover. You won't.
Well, for some of us, Monday night was
Yeah,
that
but
bad.
but it was a competitive game, right? Now, your field goal theory was on full display,
Yes.
but
By the way, I wanted to bring this up. Monday night football, the Eagles Falcons game, is exactly why you do not settle in fourth and short situations. The Eagles lost that game because they settled for a field goal. Being down 6 and giving the other team the ball is inviting a loss because there's the psychology aspect of it too. Whereas, let's say the Eagles don't get the fourth down there and it's 4th and 3 with, I'm trying to remember the scenario, with I think a minute
Mhm.
40 on the clock. They were on Atlanta's like 7 to 10, somewhere around there. If you don't get the fourth down when you go for it there,
march it
they
down the
still
field.
but they still have to
Mhm.
drive. The psychology of it aspect of it is once they're in field goal range, they won't go for it on fourth down anymore. So you don't have to worry about that. You're eliminating it down once they get into the other territory. Inherently, the goal is to not turn it over, especially when they get closer to field goal range. So they're not going to take as many of those shots downfield. You're just creating an aspect of it that pushes play callers and teams to be more conservative. We've seen this time and time again. I would genuinely rather be up 3 than up 4 if the other team had the ball with a minute and a half left, because you're in like there is a passivity that comes into play with the other team that allows you to stay in the game. It creates more opportunities for you to win the game,
This
essentially.
is definitely what's kept John up this week, no doubt.
Oh, you have no idea. I was so mad on Monday. I was furious on Monday. There were and listen, there were a lot of calls that game that I thought the Eagles crushed, right? Like they go for it early
Mhm.
in the game, they don't get it, that's fine. They go
Fourth
for it
down
the next
stop.
time. They get it the next time they won fourth down and score a touchdown that drive. Essentially, they're +1 compared to if they had tried field goals both times. They kicked the field goal when they should have to go up 1. I think it was late third quarter. Like they were doing everything right, and then it gets to the biggest moment of the game, and Nick Sirianni turtles up. Like that's inexcusable. Like that's the kind of stuff that costs teams playoff games, championships, regular season games in general.
The
That's the kind of
Saquon
stuff.
Barkley drop. Didn't Smitty also drop a touchdown if I'm remembering
It got knocked out
really
of it. Got
or
punched out of his
yeah, yeah,
hands.
yeah. It was like
That's like
he had it and
yeah,
didn't yeah.
but yeah,
That
that's
was
different.
because I knew because I'm the same way with the Packers. I knew Monday, not texting John after that game, gonna let
Yep.
him simmer for a while.
This is what I appreciate. Like I needed to, I was like if you had texted me, I would have ripped your head off. Like I was ready to light
Would have
anyone up who
virtually
reached
ripped
out.
my head off. See?
Yes. But
This
yeah,
is we know the boundaries of this friendship when it comes to our sports teams
yes.
and that's where like it's so hard to try and get people excited for a game like this weekend, right? Because like
Yes.
legitimately you're looking at it
Well,
and these are two different caliber programs and like it's tough to watch.
let me do my best here then. because
Uh-oh.
I do think if you are a fan of Penn State, honestly, if you're listening or watching this,
If you
listening to
made
or
it this
watching this
far.
podcast, yeah, like if you were
Yeah,
here, you care about this
for
program
sure.
deeply, and you don't just care about Drew Allar, you care about Bo Prabula, you don't just care about
Mhm.
Nick Singleton and Kaytron Allen, you care about Cam Wallace and Quentin Martin and Corey Smith, right? Like the three backup running
For sure.
backs. Like this is an opportunity for those guys to put film out there, right? Whether
Mhm.
it's and honestly,
Oh, no, John. Uh-oh.
this is no,
Put film
not
out
for
there for where?
not for the portal or anything like that. I'm talking about like
Right.
for us to learn about how good
Mhm.
these guys are and if they can sort of fit in at this level. This is going to sound strange to hear, but I will watch this game on replay more closely than I did Bowling Green because you could pretty quickly
Yeah.
diagnose what happened at Bowling Green and be done with it. There weren't a lot of reps for guys that you don't know what they are. I will go back and watch this several times to focus on different players and see what we learn about them. So if you care about essentially more the future of the program than the current state of it, or even guys that, hey, maybe Dejon Lane, this is a good example.
Mhm.
He's not going to play a ton of snaps unless something happens, but let's say he gets called upon Maryland or Purdue or whatever, like, and he's in the game, you can say, okay, I remember against Kent State, he did X, Y, and Z, and I thought that stood out. And then you have that, you know what I mean? That baseline of
For
information, that
sure.
there's baseline of snaps. So I do think that it is important for pretty much everyone that isn't a first string player on the depth chart. Problem is, those first string guys are usually ones that are going to dictate who's winning and losing on Saturdays.
Yeah, and that's the point, right? It's like I'm not here to diminish the value of this game for
Yeah,
fans or the value for, if you are that fourth string player and this is your chance or you're a walk on, right? And this is your chance
parents and
to
families
see
that
yeah. Like
yeah,
that stuff is awesome, right? Like those moments are great. But in terms of you look around the sport and you say, well, these are your gimme games. And I mean, in fairness to Kent State, this game, the contract was signed in 2019. This game was supposed to be played in 2020. Then obviously COVID hits, all the non-conference games in the Big Ten get canceled. So this is the makeup for the 2020 game. If you look at it from their perspective, they're going from playing Tennessee one week to Penn State the next. This is not ideal for them either. Now, granted, Penn State is paying them $1.6 million, so there are 1.6 million reasons that they can try to feel okay about this a little bit. But the big thing for them is you get out of this, that you go to conference play, you then have, more winnable, reasonable games potentially for them. But
who, real quick
go
to
ahead, go ahead.
make note of something you said, do you know who they would have played against, who Penn State would have played against had they played this game in 2020?
Who pensed Dante Cephas.
Dante Cephas. That was
Yep.
his second year at Kent State. He played in 4 games in that season, 11 catches, 136 yards. Yeah, I mean, that is how, you know what I mean? That was the beginning of when
Was
this was
that was
supposed
that
to
when
be
Sean
played.
Lewis was still there?
Yeah, I believe so. I think
Yeah.
Lewis was, yeah, because he was obviously at
With
Colorado in
Yeah.
2023, and he was Kent State a good bit before that. But yeah, uh, this is, like you said, though, that there's no diminishing like the meaningfulness for people or certain people involved in this from a learning about the
Current
upside of the
team.
team. We're not going to learn a ton here. That's
Here
point blank, end of story. But we will learn more about the future, and we will learn more about the depth of the current team, which is important. Like there will inevitably be a time where, whether it's Dejon Lane or Cam Wallace or Tyler
Mhm.
Johnson or any of these younger guys on the
Anthony
roster,
Ivy.
Anthony Ivy, like these guys that aren't playing right now, they might be called upon in an important moment. And this is kind of a chance for them to get their feet wet and be ready for those bigger moments.
Here's the one thing, John, because I was thinking about this earlier today, right? In the context of this season, right? In terms of Penn State making a playoff push, a playoff run, what might we wait? Let me try this again. What might we learn? There we go. What might we learn about the current construction of this team in a meaningful way? And I think potentially the only thing, right? Obviously, we talked about get out, stay healthy. But I think the only thing might be okay, we saw what Tennessee just did to these guys. Is there any comparison? Is there any worthwhile point to see what Penn State does? Or is it apples to burnt orange?
Boo. Transitive property doesn't work in college football. No, I don't think it matters, honestly, because there's a chance Penn State's up 49-0 in the first half. They take their foot off the gas completely, and it ends 49-14. They don't cover, and all of a sudden people are like, well, they only won by 35. Tennessee won by 71. And then you can look at the halftime scores and see.
But Tennessee only gave up 6 points in the second half because they let their foot off the gas too, John. But they were up by 61 at halftime.
Yeah, I'm here to tell you that I am unconcerned about the point differential, unless it's 21-7, in which case I would be concerned. But
we'll be having a whole different conversation next week.
Yeah, I think we will be. I think we'll be having a lot of conversations next week if it is a 2-possession game, anywhere past like the second quarter. But yeah, I think mostly there's not a ton here. And so with that, I think we can probably get to our predictions for this game. Do you have a final score?
I do, but I also have a player that we'll be talking about on Sunday.
Yes, we'll do that after we do the
okay. My score prediction, and now that I know that people, I have to think about this, John. I've probably been giving people like scores based off of my thought and my gut for years.
I have been very aware of the spread and the over under every time I've given a prediction, because I do know that people, listen, inherently we know more than most on the outside, right? Like, and so this is it, right? Like, this is, a lot of people will listen, and I'm not saying you should, to be clear, but a lot of people will listen and take advice from it. I did a best bet story last year. I can't remember. I had a significant winning record when like putting out, bets that people should take on Penn State games, right? Like it's part of it. But yeah, I've been aware of this for years when putting it together score predictions.
So where I was going with that was like, maybe I've made people a lot of money just with my honesty. Maybe I've lost them and cost them a lot of money.
I'm not sure.
I'm not sure, but I do have a score for Saturday. I might be a little too over the top on this potentially, just because I don't think James Franklin is going to necessarily run it up a ton, but I do think that this offense is really good. It's going to be explosive. And I think we're going to see these starters, I would guess, for at least a half. And then we see Bo Papula, and we want to see what he can do. I'm going, John. I'm curious to see your reaction. I'm picking Penn State to win on Saturday, 63-3.
Oh, that's not far off from what I have.
Okay.
I have Penn State winning 56-3, which again, intentional, covers the spread and is the over. The over under currently is 55.5. I actually feel pretty confident about that over in general, because I think Penn State's going to get to, like, I thought when I picked 56 is like, this is probably near the low end of outcomes for Penn State. I just think they're going to light them up. And the 3 is like, Kent State is desperately driving for a field goal late in the game so they don't get shut out across 2 weeks, and they finally get one. But that is it. I don't think this game's going to be close. As for, and we'll go reverse order now. We'll snake draft this thing. For the player I think we'll be talking about Sunday, I think that's Cam Wallace. I think he's going to get a lot of carries.
My guy,
there it is.
My pick.
So we both have Cam Wallace then. I think he's going to get a lot of carries in the game. I think, again, you don't want to overload your running backs with carries in general. You especially don't want to do that on Saturday. So I think there's a strong chance that I think the stat line I put in our story was that he gets over 100 rushing yards, that he has 2 touchdowns in the game. Like, I think this is like a career day for him, and is very obviously short career to this point. I think he just has an incredible day. We see that speed that made him such an attractive recruit for Penn State, and gives people reason to believe that there's a third running back that could get snaps if necessary.
You know, John, because you took my guy.
That already has gotten snaps, by the way. I want to be clear on that.
Because you took Cam Wallace, I will stay there in that running back room and go with Quentin Martin. Again, somebody that there's a lot of intrigue about. You mentioned the number 3 back, right? He's had some health concerns early on. Every time, and I don't know if this is by design from James Franklin or not, but every time he mentions seemingly Quentin Martin, he always mentions Corey Smith too, right? And while Smith is somebody who I think we probably see take a red shirt this year, just because there aren't that many opportunities, they've spoken highly of him. They want to, I would think this is a guy, if he's ready, you want to get him some run in a game like this. So you and I are going to be focused on the running backs exclusively. Yes. It sounds like,
honestly, no, I will be
focused
on the receivers mostly, right? I want to see who does what at receiver, because James Franklin has talked about a lot about reps for this offense in general.
Mm-hmm.
And once the backups are in, they should be throwing the ball because they do need to get these guys some reps. I
See
don't
what
know
they do
how
under the
much they will,
lights,
but
right? I mean,
yeah.
I thought, John, you said you were going to pay attention to the receivers because I was banking on post game. You were going to ask all the Kent State players for their fondest Dante Cephas memory. Like, did you ever cross paths with him? Do you remember anything about him? That's why I thought you were going with that, but never
Dante
mind.
Cephas not having his best season at Kansas State, unfortunately for
I was going to
us,
say, I have
us
no
true
idea
believers
how
still.
really it's not going well.
Do not believe he has a catch yet. Although I think he might have last week against Arizona. He's gotten a lot of snaps, which, I mean, kind of lines up with what we saw last season too, if I'm being honest. But all right, I think that is a good place to leave it. We went off the rails a couple times, as tends
As
to happen
promised.
during Kent State week. As I said before, if you want to read Audrey's writing, you can find it at The Athletic. You can find her on Twitter at OddSnyder4. You can find me on Twitter at John Sauber. You can find my writing at centerdaily.com. That's CENTRE, like the county we are currently in. Of course, don't forget to rate, review, and subscribe to the podcast if you're listening on Apple Podcasts. That helps us, as I mentioned earlier. The subscribe button down below, the thumbs up button down below on YouTube is also very helpful. We will be back post-game to talk about what we see unfold, and I'm going to guess that we just predicted a lot of it and nailed those predictions.
As
until
always.
then, yeah, that's right. Thank you for tuning in. Have a great day.